My baby dolls, we're back again on Genesis. As always, I am your host, Ian Kahanowitz, the man with the plan, the co-captain, the co-pilot. He busted his arm, so he's still going to not be on the show for a while. But we are bringing back recurring guests, former Major League Baseball player Jimmy Driscoll, who was on the A's and the Senators and Rangers in the late 60s, early 70s, and Krister Swanson, who wrote that great book, Baseball's Power Shift, How the Players Union, the fans, the media changed the American sports culture. Before we even begin the show, this is our third take on this subject with Marvin Miller. I do want to give a shout-out to Krister and congratulate him. He has just won the 2017 Baseball Research Award, my favorite, which honor outstanding research projects completed during the preceding calendar year, which his book was published, that has significantly expanded our knowledge or understanding of baseball. And he has been awarded an award. I always say this book is very, very important to read. You get a general flavor, if not a ground-hard lesson, of what players have had to go through since the end of the Civil War up until pretty much the annual strike, and how instrumental Marvin Miller was when he became head of the Players Union in 1966. Without any further ado, welcome to the show, Jimmy and Krister.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Ian. Good to be back. And the power of technology, we're all in different parts of the country, yet we're right on basically the same microphone. Tremendous.
Man, last time you guys were going to put me out of a job, everyone was just hogging for the microphone. It was beautiful. I could have just stepped out. I could have just stepped out and let you guys run. You're going to put me out of the job. You and my producer loved it. You guys are just so charismatic and yet, so knowledgeable. Both of you have done your homework. Of course, Jimmy has lived through it. Last time we were on the show, we finished up with the 72 season. I wanted to ask Jimmy this question. Jimmy, with the 72 strike, it was the first strike, of course, that the players had. And we went through the sentiment and all the other stuff. On the Texas Rangers that year, some people had strange schedules. Some didn't finish the 162 game. What was the sentiment like in Texas by the end of the season?
Well, I'll tell you. I'll start at the beginning with spring training. I was traded over that winter. I was traded from the Oakland Athletics to the Washington Senators, and that winter the Senators left Washington and landed in Arlington, Texas, to become the Texas Rangers. So I was a member, and so spring training, that was my first experience with that organization, and quite a group there. First and foremost, Ted Williams, the great splendid Splinter, as he was known as, was the manager of the Texas Rangers. That's just for openers. A couple of the coaches, another Hall of Famer, Billy Fox was one of the coaches there down there. George Soucy was one of the coaches, another all-time baseball fan. But anyway, the player rep that year for the Rangers was none other than Big Frank Howard, Big Hondo. And so it looked like we had the meeting with Marvin in spring training, and all things were looking towards a strike. This was early on in spring training, and all arrows pointed to, if push came to shove, we were going to go on strike. So we had a meeting in the clubhouse, and Big Frank Howard said, listen, we're all in this together. We've come this far. And once they give you that pink slip, you're released. They don't, it's what have you done for me lately? Once they give you the pink slip, they don't care about you. That was the sentiment between the players and the owners at that time. So with that meeting, spring training proceeded. I had a good spring and made the ball club. I was no guarantee that I was going to make that club. I had to show my stuff in spring training. I had a good spring, and made the club. So the strike actually happened right at the end of spring training. I don't know the exact time, but it was pretty close to the opening of the season. So the verdict came down that, yes, indeed, the players were going to go on strike, and we did go on strike. And all players, they went to their respective homes. They didn't go to Texas because there was nothing to do there. And we were barred from the ballparks, and the owners made it difficult. And so I went from Florida back to Boston, where I'm from and where I lived, and waited it out. Meanwhile, I'm just a young kid, a rookie, and no money to speak of. You know, you relied on your salary you were going to be making. You had to have a job in the off season, so it was a real stretch for a lot of players to go on strike. And I was talking to Krister just before the show, and I was mentioning to him how by going on strike, we strengthened the union to go on to make it a powerful unit as it's turned into today. And the union today is probably one of the strongest unions in all of America, really.
Absolutely.
And they're in the driver's seat. So we went on strike to make it stronger, and it turned out that it was to the union's benefit that we did go on strike. And due to Marvin Miller's guidance, this whole show is about Marvin Miller and Krister's book. And congratulations from me to you too, Krister, for your recent award.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy.
But as the season went on, it was I didn't actually play the full season because they made some kind of a trade with Cincinnati that me and Hal King went to the Reds for Jim Merritt, who was a left-handed pitcher, was the trade. And subsequently, the Reds sent me to AAA, and I wound up in Indianapolis for a good half a season of ball. So I wasn't around the whole season with Texas, so I can't really comment on the thinking of the players as we were playing in a shortened season. But the fact that I was there at the beginning in the strike, and Marvin Miller, I'll never forget him coming into the clubhouse and with his buddy Dick Moss, his sidekick, and you could tell that he knew what he was talking about. He had all his ducks in a row, and the players of today, they should thank their lucky stars that Marvin Miller was involved in the early days and got to the union as it is today, as I said. So.
Now, let me ask you this, Krister. Along in 72, how huge was this? Besides getting the $500,000 increase in pension fund payments, the owners agreed to add salary arbitration.
Well, arbitration became a huge thing, right? Just because the players had never been able to really have any power with that before. And we talked earlier, Ian, and even a little bit last time when Jimmy, when you were on the show, how powerless the average player was in negotiations under the reserve clause. And just a quick recap for folks that are maybe listening for the first time, you know, with the reserve clause, you had no other option than to sign with the team that gave you your original contract. They owned the rights to you. They could sell you, they could trade you, but as far as you know, you being able to say, you know, obviously no kind of free agency or anything like that. And so just to be able to arbitrate, to be able to play better than your salary, so to speak, and then be able to have somebody who could listen and say, look, I'm not being paid a fair rate for the skill I'm bringing to the team. And Jimmy, you could speak to this much better than any of us, I'm sure, since you actually had to negotiate contracts under these conditions. But you took what you could get, more or less. You really didn't have any power. The general managers, team personnel were really skilled at playing players off against each other. You know, making guys really suspicious of other guys in terms of what they were earning, and kind of sowing distrust amongst the team so that it was difficult. One of the big challenges for the union early, and Jimmy, you probably remember this, was trying to collect good data on salaries, on what guys were actually making. so that when a player went to arbitration, he could say, hey, this is a fair number for a guy that, hit close to 300 and played in 140 games and stole this many bases. And, this is a more fair number than the $15,000-$20,000 you paid me last year. So I'd love to hear Jimmy's take on this, but the arbitration piece was huge, and it was huge, I'm guessing, again, deferring to Jimmy on this, but I'm guessing that it really strengthened the player's sense of what could happen through arbitration, through bargaining, and again, through this sort of stronger, more militant union that was ready to take action and make gains for the players.
Absolutely, and to put an exclamation point on how much power the owners had before all this developed, the arbitration and the free agency. I read a story recently that Mickey Mantle, after having, this was probably in the 50s at one time, I don't know the exact date, but Mickey Mantle was negotiating his contract after having a tremendous season. And they sent him a contract that didn't reflect the numbers that he had put up the season before. I mean, they were MVP numbers or something close to it. He had an MVP year every year, it seems to me. But anyway, they sent him a contract, and he sent it back unsigned. And whoever the general manager was, I forget his name.
Weiss, George Weiss.
George Weiss, there you go. He sent Mickey Mantle a letter back saying, well, if you don't want to sign this contract, you might as well just stay home, right? Stay home. So Mickey Mantle stayed home. He didn't go to spring training. And then the owner, whoever the owner was at the time, it went all the way to the top. And the owner realized that his star guy was not in spring training over a few $1,000s, whatever it was. But the owners had that kind of control. If you didn't like what they offered you, they told you to stay home.
Right.
And they held all the cards. Really, if you didn't, I've set a few contracts back and negotiated a few more $1,000, but they weren't going to overpay you. That's for sure. Even the greatest players of the game at the time were underpaid. Until Marvin Miller came along. And now the owners, who were, I mentioned this before, sitting up in their luxury boxes, smoking their big cigars, knowing that they had holding the power of the purse strings, they finally started squirming in their seats because this little weasel, Marvin Miller, was hanging around and talking to the players and letting them know that we were the guys with the ability. Well, we were the, as the old saying goes, the blacks had all the talent, but the Jews owned the instruments, And it was the same. You can equate that to the owners and the players. The players had all the ability, but the owners were reaping all the rewards. And when the arbitration thing came down, finally players were realizing that they figured out what the going rate was. They compiled all the statistics of a player in the same position as you, and basically the same numbers what they were getting from another club, and they kind of came up with a general consensus what that position and those numbers were worth due to Marvin Miller.
Yeah.
And then the owners, they sat up and started paying attention because their money supply was being interfered with,
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that's a fair characterization, Jimmy, to say that the owners really sort of promoted this atmosphere in which players were sort of leery of sharing that kind of information, sharing their own salary information with each other?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were some players, the better players were making pretty good money, for the time. And it was all secretive. Nobody knew what anybody was making, So the older, the established players, they were kind of hesitant to, give up their money that they were making to go on strike and to join the union. So there was, there was reluctance among the players to all band and bond together, just for the fact that nobody knew what anybody was making,
Right. And I tell a story in my book that was kind of famous, a Buzzy Bavasi moment, where he would leave contracts out for really successful guys on his desk and then leave the guy he was negotiating with in the office by himself, with like a contract for somebody who was better than that player in his position group on the table with a lower number on it to kind of make the guy feel grateful for what he was getting. Does that sound like a familiar tactic?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the great Mickey Mantle, they told him to stay home.
Right. Yeah, isn't that something else? And I think as you said it, Jimmy, that shows the belief they had that they really hold all the cards is really interesting. And I think that a modern day example of that, I don't want to get us too far off the topic, but a modern day example of all this is what's happening right now with the NCAA and this push to maybe start compensating some of the NCAA athletes, given the billions of dollars now that are being pulled in that industry, and that there are many NCAA institutions that are using that student athlete agreement kind of like the owners used to use the reserve clause.
Exactly.
In terms of,
imagine playing football at Ohio State or one of those where the football money is basically running the university.
Yeah, it's crazy.
The money coming in.
It's crazy.
100,000 people on a Saturday afternoon, probably paying $20 a piece to get in, minimum. So that money without that athletic budget, those schools they'd be hurting. So yeah, somebody step forward. I don't know where it is at the moment, but start compensating these players.
Yeah, well, the kids at Northwestern made a push to try and get officially certified as a union.
Yeah.
And I think they fell short. I didn't think they got certified, but I know they went for it. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that's an interesting modern day parallel just because, like I said, the best way I can put it is just like the owners, when you played, used the reserve clause to maintain absolute control over their labor force. I feel like the NCAA is doing that now, using that. And one of the big things I argue in the book is what the players union had to do was really start convincing the public that this was a raw deal. Because the owners were so good at convincing the public, well, we have to have the reserve clause. It's necessary for competitive balance. All of these things the players want, and Ian's got us, is gently, slowly pushing us forward. We've made it all the way to 1972 in salary arbitration. That all of these things the players want are bad for the game. That they're going to ruin this institution of baseball. They're a threat to the national pastime. And we're starting to hear the same rhetoric now from the NCAA.
Exactly, and it's a beautiful parallel to make because, as I said, without the talent on the field, these guys don't have a position in ownership. I mean, let's face it. Without the players, there's no baseball.
Right. I mean, the student athletes are the product on the field.
Exactly, same parallel. And yes, the owners tried to. They were selling the public a bill of goods saying that as you mentioned, the reserve clause was necessary and the America's pastime was going to be ruined. And by that time, baseball has, the increase in attendance was starting to show up. And I mean, let's face it, baseball, life begins on opening day as far as I'm concerned, And I'm a fan.
Right.
Although I watch a game with players' eyes, I'm still a fan of the great game of baseball. You still have to catch it, throw it, and hit it to play.
Right.
And it's a specialty. I mentioned before, it's a God-given ability that you're born with. It's a hand-eye coordination that you can't work hard to get because it's a gift. It's a gift from God Himself to be able to put a bat on a ball, and so it's a specialty group. Many are called and few are chosen. Every little kid wanted to hit the home run in the 7th game of the World Series in his backyard with Whitey Ford pitching or Nolan Ryan pitching and 3-2 in the count, and all of a sudden you hit one deep into the woods, you know.
Yeah.
So they were toying with the emotions of people that baseball might not be the same if we didn't have all these rules in place.
Sure, absolutely.
Until Marvin came along and let the fans know that the players were being basically mistreated, you know.
Now, you know, folks, right after 72 and the whole strike, the lightning strike from April 1st to the 13th, now we go into the winter of discontent between Miller and Kuhn and the owners, because here's where it's heating up. Two things I think are taking place, and Krister, you might want to explain what's going on.
I'm sorry, Ian, one more time with the question.
Oh, you didn't hear me?
No, it cut out for just a second.
Yeah, sometimes we have this. Well, anyway, 72 brought the lightning strike. Now 73 is going to bring a lockout. Okay? So, Marvin Miller and the union are up against Kuhn, who seems to be doing the best interest of baseball by signing with the owners. What's going on with Marvin Miller and the players in 73?
Well, now, you know, as Jimmy mentioned, 72 is the strike season, so they had to make it through the strike. And as Jimmy pointed out, you know, the strike only makes the players stronger. By 73, you know, you've got owners, especially some of the more militant guys. Gussie Bush always comes to mind. I'm getting mixed up, but Clark was usually the Twins owner was always very much in his camp too, really concerned about giving anything into the players. And so in 73, as we continue to kind of try and sort our way through some of these issues, the arbitration, continued contributions to the pension, and the players' ongoing assault on free agency, and trying to really deal with that through collective bargaining, which is, you know, when we talked about flood, we talked about how the owners in court had left that to really, you know, were trying to leave that to they were really trying to leave that to the owners in court said they really wanted to leave that to arbitration or to negotiations, to collective bargaining, which Miller loved because Miller knew he had the upper hand there. You know, Miller with his background with the steel workers, Miller 6 years now into his time with the MLBPA, so that he has the faith of the players at this point, and I think Jimmy has really reinforced that with some of the things that he said. Kuhn sees himself as the guy who really can do this, right? He has what Robert Burke, historian, I really enjoyed. I read both of his books on the players' labor movement. They're very, very good books. Anyway, Robert Burke called it commissioneritis. You know, that Kuhn has commissioneritis, that he really feels like he can fix this and hold this together. So 73 becomes this moment now, and my timing might be a little off, but was Kuhn the interim commissioner in 72 and the full-fledged commissioner in 73? Does that sound right?
Sounds kind
or am I maybe off a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right in the same ballpark, so go ahead.
Yeah, so he's now, you know, sort of feeling his oats, so to speak, and I think really feeling like it's time for the owners to kind of put the players in place. And I'm blanking right now. What was the issue in 73?
You had the arbitration, and then you had a certain kind of the owners proposed a version of limited free agency, where you have the 5-year men, the 8-year men, the 10-year men.
Yeah, and so and this is all happening against the backdrop, right, of Vida Blue and Catfish Hunter and some of those trial balloon free agents that we have in 73. You know, the owners are nervous and they want to reassert control, and some of the more strident militant voices amongst the owners are feeling like, well, this is time to teach the boys a lesson and we're going to lock them out. I think kind of again feeling like, well, this is a chance to test the militancy and the strength of the union. What they found, of course, in their attempted lockout is that the players were unified. They were going to stick together, and they were, that they had this strong sense of militancy and solidarity, and they knew that they were on a path to getting what they wanted. They could smell the finish line, so to speak. And I'd love to hear Jimmy's thoughts on this because he was there and he was in the clubhouse talking to these guys. But the sense I sure have is that by 73, the players were going to stick with Marvin's plan no matter what. Kuhn was in over his head, so to speak. The owners still were not a group well suited to collective bargaining because they had so many different interests and mindsets. The small market guys were always super nervous about a lack of revenue. That was crushing to them. And so, this dynamic you're talking about, Ian, the Miller Kuhn thing, I think finally when we talk about holding all the cards, I think Miller's holding all the cards. And Kuhn is unable to even see the game that's being played around him, so to speak.
Yeah, and the players, they were like the sharks, and they were smelling the blood in the water to line it up like that, because the players realized that through Marvin, I mean, the players, they put all their cards in Marvin's hands, and Marvin knew that he had all the cards. He had the Royal Straight Flush in his hands, and the players knew that. And Marvin knew it too. So he wasn't shy to the fact that the owners would try and put a power play on the players, because he knew in the end that we were holding all the cards at that time, And I can't say enough about Marvin. I never really thought about him as much as I have since I met Krister and we're talking about him. But reflecting back, all these things are coming right into focus again after all these years removed from it. But Marvin, he was the guy, and the owners finally realized that, hey, we've got something we're going to have to contend with here, and we're going to have to give a little bit just to, to keep this thing going. Otherwise, there won't be anything to keep going, because the players will not play for the money and the compensation that the owners were putting on the table. And that's where the collective bargaining started really to happen,
And let me ask you this, Krister. We're at the point right now where you could just, like you said, you could smell it. A reserve clause, it's going to come. How come public opinion stopped for the players at this time? We're right at the cusp of swinging the pendulum to get the fans, they all said, look, this is enough already. You guys play a fun sport.
Well, it kind of, and I really try to explore this, as you know, Ian, in the book, but there's this sense that players are always up against well, first of all these themes the owners are always hitting, right? It's, these are men being paid to play a boys' game. Baseball is a traditional cornerstone of American society, and we can't do anything to change it. They would go all the way back to the 1880s and 90s and the problems with gambling and those kinds of things and competitive balance, and talk about how the rules were in place for a reason, and this is why baseball needed to be the way it was, and of course they had the antitrust exemption. Congress and the courts had agreed with them time and time again. Baseball was unique. It was special. This was how it was supposed to be. So when you do finally get Marvin Miller in place and things start moving forward, starting in the mid-'60s and then building into this time we're talking about now, the players would make some gains. The public would come to realize that the players were in the right. The players would make some gains, but then there was this constant sort of bounce back of, well, now they've gained enough. And I think you see that in 72 and 73. You see in 72, you see the players are, kind of people understand. They get it. They're like, all right, okay, I understand why you guys are digging in your heels, and there's enough voices in the baseball press that kind of come around to that. But in 73, it's a sense to a certain degree of a public that's torn between the players and the owners. And they're like saying, all right, that was a win for the players. Now we kind of understand why the owners want to hold on to this. And we're tired of the strikes and we're tired of the lockouts. So that was a constant battle for the players because this traditionalist mindset was so deeply instilled in the fans. Because the fans really truly believed many of the arguments made by these owners that you couldn't tinker with the reserve clause. You couldn't tinker with the way players were dealt with because, again and again and again, owners had reinforced this notion that the players were just really overgrown boys, and the owners were like fathers. It was a very paternalistic kind of relationship. And so I think that's always the battle, Ian, that you're asking about the public. It's always that every time the players made a game, they had to continue to kind of work the PR angles and continue to kind of make their case to the public that this would be okay. Because the players knew, too, that the game needed to survive. And I'm sure Jimmy would speak to this, too. The players weren't looking to destroy the institution. They just needed it to be a healthier setup for the players. It was in their best interest to see the industry thrive also.
Exactly when you mentioned that, Krister, because this was our livelihood. I mean, but the general public, especially today, I won't start talking about the money that's floating around today, but the general public, I mean, these are hardworking people, 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, scraping a salary together to feed their families, and meanwhile these players, and a lot of people look at players as being, as you said, grown men playing a boy's sport, and what makes them deserve more money than somebody going to a steel factory in Pennsylvania working hard, so the more money that. And as you say, it was a PR thing with the players. They didn't want to ruin kill the golden calf because this was their livelihood. Without baseball,
right?
You're looking for a job yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
and,
the going rate. Go ahead, Ian.
No, go ahead. No, please.
Yeah, no, they were looking for all the players were looking for was the going rate. And they were
right.
trying to establish the going rate. There you go. I'm bringing up Marvin again. And Marvin was the guy that was kind of carving out the going rate, to be compensated for the ability that we had to do something special,
Right.
And something? Because now we're going to get into your old roommate over here. Krister mentioned it before. Vida Blue. What happened with Vida Blue here, Krister?
Well, Vida was in kind of a unique situation. He was burst onto the scene and really tremendously successful and exciting. And I'm trying to think of a contemporary pitcher to compare to Vida Blue in terms of how he sort of captured, the imagination of what was going on. Of course, both he and Catfish Hunter had the advantage or disadvantage of playing for Charlie Finley. Charlie, of course, was known as a promoter, but also as somebody who could, play cat and mouse games with the best of them in terms of paying his players and getting those kinds of, trying to take advantage of those situations and not paying his players is the better way to put it. Hunter, of course, was able to get out of his contract because Charlie Finley failed to follow through on payments on an annuity that he had promised Hunter. With Vida Blue, it was a little bit of a different situation, but Blue was essentially able to leverage his position with Finley so that he became somebody who could like one of these trial balloon free agents, right? He became somebody who was a rising star as a pitcher. And again, pitchers were extremely valued because, pitchers back then, a lot of them threw every 4 nights. And so a good pitcher was going to double your attendance. And Vida Blue was certainly one of those kinds of pitchers. He was a Koufax, Drysdale-ish, quality pitcher at his peak, playing for, the 73, 72, 73, the A's of the early 70s, obviously one of the best teams in baseball, kind of gets lost, I think, for a lot of people. But certainly he was generating a lot of revenue for the team, and in successfully challenging Finley and getting out of his contract and being able to kind of renegotiate with other teams, that got players very excited about the possibility. You followed that up because he was right before Catfish Hunter, if I remember correctly. Hunter was 74.
He was.
Yeah.
Right.
So Vita Blue kind of got that rolling. I think Catfish Hunter was watching the whole time and really paying attention to how that might work out. I think, Hunter was probably relieved when Finley didn't follow through on his annuity payments, because then he knew he had that thing that could get him out of his contract. And that's where we are by that point in time, right? As we move forward from 73 into 74 and 75, 75, of course, would be the year McNally and Messerschmitt would play without contracts. Guys are starting to figure that out. And again, as Jimmy's pointed out so well, now because they have the guidance of Marvin Miller and they have a full understanding of what it means to, okay, so your contract says this, so here are some of the ways that you can get free from or break away from the language of that contract. Here are the things that could make you a free agent, in the meantime, before we actually get free agency. And so Blue to Hunter and then Messerschmitt and McNally in 75, you see this clear progression of players really starting to understand what needed to be done in order to push this issue of free agency forward. Meanwhile, when we talk about division amongst the owners, you have owners that are totally opposed to free agency and refusing to participate, and then you've got George Steinbrenner sitting there in the Yankee offices who's thrilled with the idea that he's going to be able to bid on the most talented players. And Ted Turner, for example, in Atlanta, some of these guys that are the younger owners with the bigger checkbooks that are excited for this. They're ready for this. And they could care less how much, the Griffiths and the Bushes are screaming about that we can't do this. They're like, yeah, this is the future. This is where it's going. And to tie it all back together with the PR piece, Ian, I think that where the players really had to do their part was to convince the public and help the public understand that this was not going to hurt the game. That if anything, it would make the game even better. That it would be more competitive. And certainly, we saw the biggest runs of dominance by single teams with the reserve clause, not without the reserve clause, right? Since the reserve clause has been abolished, we haven't had the dynasties like we had when the reserve clause was in place.
Sure.
So, just I think another interesting thing to think about.
And in your book you wrote that although, Vita Blue and Catfish Hunter, their thing, Vita Blue got from about, I think he was making $14,000 a year and he's making $62,000, and Catfish got out of his contract because of the annuity. Miller and the Major League Baseball union leadership knew they needed more than just a breach of contract in order to formally challenge the reserve clause. That's where McNally and Messerschmitt come in. But I want to ask Jimmy. Jimmy, at this time in 75, you were going on to the Cincinnati Reds, as I recall.
Correct. And just to back up for a second, I remember Krister mentioned that the dynasties were developed with the reserve clause in place. You remember growing up as a kid, knowing that you'd have your favorite players on a team, and you were almost guaranteed that they were coming back the next year, and year after year after year. So, I can name one of my favorite teams as a kid with the Yankees, of course, those great teams. And I can rip off a lineup right now that dates back to the 50s because they were your favorite players and you could see them on the same club each year after year after year for their whole career, most of them, due to the reserve clause. But now, you might have allegiance to fall in love with a player on your hometown club and he puts a couple of good years together, say somebody from Tampa. They're not going to pay you, so the free agency comes, and the next thing you know, your favorite player is now on the opposing club that you hate the most. So, although baseball is baseball, the allegiance that you have to your team has kind of been diluted over the years due to the free agency. but also I lost my train of thought here. But as far as when I was playing, we were the ball players. That's what we were. We were ball players. We weren't union guys or technicalities that we were thinking about. We were ball players. That's what we were there to do, to play ball. That's what we were there for. And then when Marvin came in, he was showing us how to cross the T's and dot the I's of your contract. And the one mess up by Finley negated Catfish Hunter's contract because of a slip up in the front office. All right? But the players were there to play ball. Now they're more involved with the front office type stuff and the legalities of everything. But they're still ball players. That's what they're there.
Let me ask you this, Jimmy. Big Hondo, Frank Howard, he didn't ask players around you like yourself to join him with the union talks and stuff and become like a speaker for the guys?
Well, there's been, you mean with the recent Doug Gladstone stuff?
Well, like back then, you could have like Bob Boone. Bob Boone was very instrumental in the 1981 strike, just as a few other people were. Did Big Honda, who was the team representative, say, "Hey Jimmy, you want to join me in representing?"
Not really. In those days, the player rep was the player rep, and one guy was representing the team, and that's what it was. It wasn't a bunch of guys going in as backup, or like a posse going in, because it was the early days. We make them the player rep, and we won't have to deal with it. That was the mindset of the players, one guy representing the team, because there wasn't much. Let's put it this way: there wasn't much to represent when the players were holding all the cards. But as time went on, of course, that's why we're talking about it today. What has developed,
I'm going to have to end my inquiry here. I wanted to get to 1981, but just barely up to 75. I love it so much. You learn so much between. This is great. It's like this. It's like this kid coming back to the show. You learn so much about Marvin Miller. You guys are in for another show regarding 75, 76, and of course going up to 80 and 81. I don't know, in about another month or so.
Well, it depends on the compensation.
Sure. Yeah, the compensation.
Yeah, Jimmy and I are going to talk, possibly unionize, and then we'll get back to you.
Great. You'll make as much as I make on the show.
my people, my representative, call you, my player rep.
Let me just say.
We'll call up, No, I'd be glad to. I love talking baseball, and I especially love talking baseball with people that are knowledgeable about baseball.
You think I'm knowledgeable about baseball? I don't know a damn thing.
Well, you're first of all, you're a good fella, Ian, and I've known you a couple of years now. And Krister, just getting to know you, but just being able to share the microphone with you has been a pleasure all mine for sure.
Yep, same here, Jimmy. Same here.
Yeah, Krister, it's really good that your book got the recognition it is. In fact, an hour before I did the show, I did a show with Paul Dixon. He just wrote the new book on Leo DeRocha, which just came out, and we spoke about how Leo DeRocha did not like Marvin Miller, and he was a traditionalist, Leo DeRocha, a little contradictive of his very liberal take, especially on Negro League players. But he yelled at the players in Chicago. He said, how dare you? How dare you go against Mr. Wrigley, who has supported you and have done this, to go with Marvin Miller? And Marvin Miller shows up in the clubhouse for the Chicago Cubs wanting to have a meeting, and Leo just says, 5 minutes and get the hell out of here.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's a great example of the paternalism, right? And I think DeRocha saw himself as somebody who was cut from the same cloth as well, I don't know if he would have thought of Spalding, right? Or
Right.
Connie Mack or some of these guys, right? Well, Spalding especially, right? Player to manager to owner.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys thought that was sort of their path. That's what they were doing. And DeRocher, I think, probably saw himself in the same light. So that's a great example, Ian, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that myself with players, and they get after their playing days are over, they get into management of some capacity and moving up the ladder and get themselves in a position of being maybe a big league manager or a big time front office guy, and they all of a sudden they take on the mentality of ownership, and they soon forget where they came from themselves.
Right.
And I don't know if they're, just looking over their shoulder to protect themselves as far as their position at the moment. But it's called big leaguing you. Somebody that you've known as a player, all of a sudden they get into management and they don't want to know you. So they call it big league. They're big leaguing you. They're in the big leagues now. And, even though I was your roommate back in the Double-A ball, it was,
right.
It's a distant memory,
Yeah.
And
so that was the mentality of Leo DeRoche.
And I think, what's another example of big leaguing, and it was very, very surprising when I read up on him, Hank Greenberg. Hank Greenberg became the general manager of the Cleveland Indians, and he took on, it's funny, you go from a player, and now you're in a position of control, and he used the reserve clause to a T in Nickel time as players. Larry Doby especially.
Yeah. And that's the big leaguing factor, All of a sudden they're in management and they forgot where they came from,
Yep.
It's almost like being a lawyer and then becoming a judge. I practiced law with a guy. Now I'm standing in front of him. He's a judge. He just took the black letter law and threw it the hell out. You never know. You never know. Anyway, I'm gonna let you go because I know Krister has to go. But
yep.
Hold the line. Let me end the show like this, folks. I'm having a great time. First of all, Jimmy Driscoll's mind is being jogged after 40-something years. This is fantastic because along with the scholarly work of Krister Swanson, and again, he's just won that award for research on his book, The Explosive Power Shift. Make sure you go out and buy it. We're having a fantastic show. We can't even move past a year or so. This is how great it is. Anyway, as always, I'm Ian Kahanowitz. I'm in for Marc Weiss, who's busted up and on the way to a doctor right now. But in the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Ian.
No, thank you, gentlemen. I'll send out an email for both of you.
Thanks, buddy.
Hey,